Chapter 5, the Integumentary System. The integumentary system includes the cutaneous membrane, which is going to be made up of the epidermis, which is superficial epithelium, and the dermis, which is the underlying area of connective tissue. In addition to those two tissue layers, we're going to find a number of accessory organs. These will include your hair, your nails, some general sense organs, and some multicellular exocrine glands, such as your sweat and your sebaceous glands. These are all going to be found primarily in the dermis, and they will protrude through the epidermis to get to the surface of the integument. The subcutaneous layer, also known as the hypodermis and the superficial fascia, separates the integument from the deep fascia that is around the other organs, such as muscles and bones. This slide provides you with a list of the accessory structures of the integument. These include the hair, which will be made up of the hair shaft and the hair follicle, the nerve fibers, the exocrine glands, which are the sweat gland, and the sebaceous gland, which is an oil gland. Also associated with the sweat gland is a sweat gland duct that will bring the sweat to the surface of the integument. And then we have a few different sensory organs. Your tactile corpuscle is located near the surface of the dermis, and it's for light pressure. And the lamellar corpuscle is located deeper in the dermis, and this is for deeper pressure. The integumentary system, or your skin and your subcutaneous layer, have numerous functions. The first is protection. It will protect you against shock, abrasion, chemicals. The second is excretion. We're going to excrete salt and water and organic waste, and these will all be released from your integumentary glands, the exocrine glands of the sweat gland and the sebaceous gland. Maintenance of a normal body temperature is the third. This is done by providing a degree of insulation to help keep your temperature up. But if you get too hot, it also is involved with sweating to bring the temperature back down. Number 4 is the synthesis of vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 will be produced using UV radiation in the skin cells, and then ultimately this will be converted to calcitrol, which is going to be needed for the absorption of calcium in the small intestine. The fifth function is for storage. It's got storage of nutrients such as lipids in the adipose tissue. And 6 is detection. They have numerous sensory structures for touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. Also seen on this diagram are the different layers of the cutaneous membrane, the epidermis and the dermis, which is divided into 2 layers, papillary and reticular, as well as some of the exocrine glands. The exocrine glands, the hair follicle, the nails, all accessory structures. The epidermis, the upper layer of the integumentary system, is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. The cells are keratinized, which means they produce a keratin protein that is going to be water resistant. It will provide mechanical protection and keep out microorganisms unless you have an injury. And it is avascular, which means it has no blood vessels, so it is dependent on the blood vessels in the dermis for its nutrients and oxygen to keep all the cells healthy. The living cells are going to be the closest to the dermis. The dead cells are going to be in layers farther from the dermis, up near the surface of the skin. The cells are called keratinocytes. These are the most abundant of the epithelial cells. They're going to fill with keratin as it moves toward the surface, and the keratin is that water-resistant protein. The epithelial ridges, those little bumps that extend down into the dermis and bind with the dermal papilla, which are bumps that go up from the dermis, and these two will interlock so the 2 layers do not come apart easily. Your skin is going to consist of either 4 layers or 5 layers of cells. These layers are called strata. Thin skin has the 4 layers of strata, and this will have hair. This is the majority of your skin. So all the hairy skin is considered thin skin. Another way to try to remember thin and 4, thin has 4 letters in it. Thick skin, which has 5 layers, has 5 layers. This has no hair, and this is going to be found only on the sole of the foot and the palm of the hand. Now the layers of the epidermis we're going to start at the bottom, closest to the dermis, and then we're going to move up towards the surface. The bottom layer is called the Stratum Basal. This is the deepest layer of the cells, and it is a single cell layer bound to the basement membrane by the hemidesmosomes, and it will consist of 3 different types of cells. The basal cells, which are the stem cells that will produce new cells through mitosis and will give rise to the keratinocytes that will then move up through the layers of the skin and replace those superficial cells, and these are dominant cell of every stratum layer. The tactile cells, are also called Merkel cells, are scattered around those basal cells, and these are sensitive to very light touch. And then we have some melanocytes. These are cells that produce the pigment melanin, and they will give color to the skin. Okay. The second layer moving up towards the surface is the stratum spinuosum. This is going to be superficial to the stratum basal, which means above it. It will consist of 8 to 10 layers of keratinocytes, and these are all bound together by desmosomes. It will also contain another type of cell called the epidermal dendritic cells. In some books they refer to them as Langerhans cells. And these are scattered throughout the stratum, and they participate in the immune response against microorganisms that make their way down through the superficial layers of the epidermis, as well as any kind of superficial skin cancers, which are a virus usually. The third layer, the Stratum Granulosum, this is superficial to the Stratum spinuosum. This will have 3 to 5 layers of keratinocytes, and at this point they are beginning to make keratin, that water-resistant protein. So they start to look grainy in appearance, so granulosum and grainy. They're going to make keratin and keratohyalin. These are 2 proteins. The keratin are fibers, and then they're going to be surrounded by the keratohyalin, which works sort of like a glue. And they're going to fill up the dead dehydrated cells, forming keratinized cells. This is the basic structural component of hair and nails. The fourth layer, this one is found only in thick skin, is the Stratum Lucidum. Lucidum means white or light in appearance. And these are going to be flattened, densely packed cells that are filled with keratin, and they're going to look white or translucent. That is only in thick skin. And then the Stratum Corneum is the outermost layer. This is the exposed surface. It is going to consist of 15 to 30 layers of dead keratinized cells. They're still attached to each other by desmosomes, so they shed in sheets. So if you get like a sunburn and you peel off a sheet of cells. The keratinization, also referred to as cornification, occurs, and this is when the formation of the protective superficial layers of cells are filled with keratin. Those keratin fibers are glued in a parallel arrangement by the keratohyalin, which is kind of a glue-like structure. And these are going to produce a relatively dry layer that is water resistant. It is not waterproof. We still have some water loss, but not as much as we would if we didn't have those keratin cells. Now, in thick skin, we have all 5 of the layers. In thin, we do not have the Stratum Lucidum. Okay. It'll take about 7 to 10 days for the cells to move from the Stratum Basal to the Stratum Corneum, and then they'll spend about 2 weeks in the Stratum Corneum. Insensible perspiration is going to be the fluid that we lose every day. Okay, just because it is not waterproof, the keratin is only water resistant. So it allows for some loss of fluid. It's about 500 milliliters per day, and this is from the interstitial fluid, the fluid between the cells, that penetrate to the surface and evaporate. This is every day. This is why you have to keep drinking water even if you don't think you're sweating. It's considered insensible because it doesn't make any sense to lose the water. It would be smarter if we didn't, but it isn't lost for any purpose, but yet it is still lost. Sensible perspiration is what you think of as sweating, and this is produced by your sweat glands for thermoregulation, to regulate your body temperature. Okay. You are going to, this is just a fun fact, shed about 30 to 40,000 cells per minute, which is about 9 pounds of skin per year that you will shed. Skin color is the result of an interaction between two things. The first is epidermal pigmentation, and the second is going to be the dermal circulation, because your blood has pigments in it that will also color the skin. Pigments in the skin include keratin, which is an orange-yellow color. This is in the epidermal cells and the fat cells of the dermis. We are going to use keratin, and we are going to convert it to vitamin A and use that for the normal maintenance of the epithelials and for synthesis of photoreceptor pigment in the eye, so night vision is affected greatly by lack of vitamin A. The second pigment is melanin. This is a brown, black, or yellow-brown pigment. This is produced by the melanocytes, melanin-producing cells, which are located in the stratum basal of the epidermis. In the figure above, you can see a large melanocyte down there in the stratum basal, the bottom layer of the epidermis. The melanocytes will produce melanin, that's the pigment, and this will be packaged into little vesicles inside the cell called melanosomes. These will then be transferred to the cytosol of the cell, of the keratinocytes in particular, and this will color the keratinocytes temporarily until the lysosomes start to fuse with the melanocytes and break them down. This is why, and this will also be triggered an increase in melanin in the melanosomes through UV radiation. So in the summer, you increase the amount of pigment you produce, and therefore you become dark in color. That tan can stick around for a while, but slowly it fades as you stop producing it, because those melanosomes are slowly broken down by the lysosomes, and then there is no more pigment left. And now all people of all skin colors have the same number of melanocytes, about 1,000 melanocytes per millimeter cubed. The difference between whether it's pale skin or dark skin is going to be the size of the melanosomes, the packets of the melanin, and where those are transferred to, which layer of the skin. If you have pale skin, you produce small melanosomes, and these are going to be transferred to the stratum basal and the stratum spinosum, the bottom two layers. You have darker skin, you will transfer large melanosomes, and these will be transferred into the stratum granulosum, that middle or third layer up. Okay. The second thing that affects your skin color, besides pigmentation, is dermal circulation. Vasodilation is when the blood vessels dilate, and when they get bigger in diameter, they're going to bring a larger amount of blood, which has the pigments in it, to the skin. So this is now going to give the skin a reddish tint. Vasoconstriction occurs when the blood vessels get smaller or constrict, and then they bring less of the pigmented blood to the skin, and you have a pale color. Cyanosis occurs when you have low oxygen supply in the blood, and this makes the skin actually appear blue in color. With vitamin D3, we're going to produce this in your epidermal cells of the stratum spinosum and the basal when it is exposed to UV radiation. So you need to go out in the sun to produce vitamin D3. With sunlight, these cells will then convert the cholesterol-related steroid that it has to vitamin D3, which is really called cholecalciferol. And then this vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, will be converted to an intermediary product in the liver, and then that product will be converted to calcitrol in the kidney. Calcitrol is the end product we're looking for. This is a hormone, and it is used by your small intestines for the absorption of calcium and phosphate ions. This is why they put milk fortified by vitamin D, because it supposedly helps you with the absorption of the calcium and phosphate ions. The dermis is going to be found below the epidermis. Epi means above, and below the dermis is the subcutaneous layer. The dermis is made up of two different layers itself. The top 20% is called the papillary layer. It is going to be made up of areolar tissue. It will contain some sensory neurons as well as capillaries, and these capillaries are going to supply the epidermis with its oxygen and nutrients and remove the carbon dioxide and waste from the epidermis. The papillary layer also has the dermal papilla. Papilla means bump. So those are the bumps that stick up from the dermis that interlock with the epidermis in the epidermal ridges where they come down and kind of hold it together like two sets of fingers going in opposite directions. The second layer, which is the bottom 80% of the dermis, is the reticular layer. And this is going to be made up mostly of dense, irregular connective tissue. It will contain both elastic and collagen fibers so that there's some ability to stretch your skin a little bit and it will rebound. Now the boundaries between the papillary and the reticular layer are really indistinct. It just kind of goes from one to the other. It's not like a definite boundary. They're tied together by bundles of collagen fibers from both the layers, and this will help to, again, hold the integument firmly attached. Your collagen fibers will then go down into the subcutaneous layer to also help anchor the dermis and the whole integument. This will contain blood vessels, its own nervous tissue, lymphocytes, which are types of blood cells, hair follicles, and various glands such as your sweat and your sebaceous glands. Now the circulation of the dermis is going to contain arteries and veins, and these are going to form a branching network called a plexus. Plexus is a generic term of a branching network of something. Here we're looking at a plexus of the arteries and veins. When we talk about nerves, we'll also talk about plexes of the nerves. There are two plexes, two different groups of the blood vessels. The cutaneous plexus is found along the border between the subcutaneous and the reticular layer, so this is lower down near the bottom of the dermis. The papillary plexus is the one that goes up on the surface of the dermis and goes up into the dermal papilla and will provide the nutrients and oxygen to the epidermis. We also have located in this area all the nerves. The nerves in the skin will control blood flow. They'll adjust the gland secretion rates and monitor sensory receptors that are located in the epidermis and dermis. For sensory receptors, we have three different types. We have tactile cells, which are individual cells. They're also called Merkel cells, and they are monitored by tactile discs, and these are located in the stratum basal, the bottom layer of the epidermis, and they're for very light touch. The next two are located in the dermis. Going from the top of the dermis, we find the tactile corpuscles, also called Mesenchymal corpuscles, and these are going to be located in those dermal papillae, those bumps of the dermis that go up just below the epidermis, and these are for light pressure. And then we have the lamellated corpuscles, also called lamellar or Pacinian corpuscles, and these are located down in the reticular layer for deep pressure. So we have light touch, then you put a little more pressure on it, you get light pressure, then you get further down and you stimulate the ones for the deep pressure. The subcutaneous layer is not really part of the integument system. It is also called the hypodermis, hypo meaning below the dermis, and also the superficial fascia. There is an indistinct boundary between the hypodermis and the reticular layer of the dermis. There's going to be collagen fibers that kind of anchor the two together. This layer of the subcutaneous or hypodermis layer is going to be made up of areolar and adipose tissue, fat. And it's quite elastic, which means it can rebound and can take a lot of pulling and tugging. It's not a true part of the cutaneous layer, but it functions to stabilize the position of the skin while allowing it to have independent movement from the skeletal muscles. We are now going to talk about the accessory structures. These are going to include the hair follicles in the hair, the exocrine glands, the nails, plus the different sensory structures. You have, with the hair follicles in the hair, about 2.5 million hairs on the human body. It's about 75% of those are on the general body surface, not what you think of when you think of hairs like your hair on the head or under your armpits. That is not where most of your hair on your body is found. Your hairs are going to be produced in the hair follicle, and they are not alive when they are outside of the follicle, when they are exposed. With the hair structure, we're going to look at the follicle in the picture above, and this is going to show you the hair root, which is the bottom portion of the hair follicle, and this is going to be where the hair is anchored into the skin, It's going to go from the hair bulb, which is the expanded bottom of the hair follicle, to about halfway to the skin surface. And at this point, the hair is still alive and growing. The hair shaft is from the halfway point to the exposed tip of the hair. The hair is no longer alive at this point. The hair follicle will be the tube where the hair is grown. It is going to be made up of epithelial tissue. And we also have in this figure some sebaceous glands, which are oil glands associated with the hair. You can see them on the upper portion of the hair. The erector pili muscle, which is a small, smooth muscle that surrounds the sheath of the hair follicle, and this will cause piloerection, what you call goosebumps, by pulling on the sheath. The purpose of producing goosebumps doesn't work for humans because we're not hairy enough. But the idea is to pull the hair up away from the skin and then provide a little barrier of hair and then a space that the air can get heated up by the body temperature but be trapped to keep your skin nice and warm. This works well with dogs or with birds, but not so much with humans. We also have down in the very bottom the root hair plexus. This is a sensory structure wrapped around the connective tissue sheath of the hair, located down near the base again. The hair itself is going to be made up of 3 different layers of keratinocytes. In the very center will be the medulla. This is the innermost layer, and it is going to be filled with a soft keratin, and this allows your hair to be flexible. Surrounding the medulla is the cortex, which will go all the way around it. This is the next layer, and this is made up of a hard keratin. And then there is the cuticle, which surrounds the cortex, and this is a layer of overlapping dead keratinized cells that will form the outer surface of the hair shaft, and it is mainly for protection. Okay. The hair follicle itself, that's where the hair is where it's growing from, is made up of 3 layers of epithelial cells. And again, these are going to be in concentric circles or zones going outward. So we have the internal root sheath, which is the closest to the cuticle, okay, and it only extends part way up to the shaft. And in the deeper portion, it's going to be down near the root. That's why it's a root sheath. A sheath means a covering. Then outside of the internal root sheath, we have the external root sheath, which is another covering, but this will extend all the way up to the skin surface. And then we have a glassy membrane, which is a thickened, clear layer that surrounds the whole connective tissue of the dermis and also runs the entire length of the follicle. At the bottom of the hair, you will see a bump. That is called the hair papilla. This is going to be a peg of connective tissue. It's connective tissue, so it's vascular, whereas the hair is epithelial, so it is avascular. The hair papilla will contain not only capillaries, but also nerves. This is going to be surrounded by an expanded area of epithelial tissue that is called the hair bulb. And right on top of the papilla, there is a layer of cells called the hair matrix. These are going to be where dividing epithelial cells are occurring. So there's a huge amount of mitosis going on here, and these are going to give rise to all the hair's keratinocytes and their melanocytes. So all the cells of the hair are going to come from that one layer from the matrix, which are stem cells that are doing mitosis. Okay. When you are an adult, you have 2 different types of hair. You have vellus hair, which is that fine peach fuzz that's located over much of the body surface. And then you have terminal hairs. These are the heavy, more deeply pigmented hair, such as your hair on your head, your eyebrows, your eyelashes, under your arms, in the axilla area, and pubic hairs. Those are all terminal hairs. In this diagram, we are seeing a cross-section of the hair and the follicles. So we're going to see those concentric layers that go around in a circle, starting with the middle layer, which is the medulla, and then that is surrounded by the cortex, and then outside of that is the cuticle. Those all make up the hair itself. Then the follicle, which is epithelial cells, is made up of the internal root sheath, then the external root sheath, and then a nice glassy membrane on the outside of that, and then this is all embedded in a connective tissue sheath. The function of hair is, one, protection of this. It protects your scalp from UV light or a blow to the head. It's in the nose and the ear canal to keep out foreign particles. The eyelashes protect your eyes from debris getting into them. Those are all protection related functions. The second is insulation. It's going to help insulate you. Now humans have, for the most part, a lot of hair on their head. We don't have as much on our whole body, whereas if you look at a dog, they have a lot more insulation because they have hair throughout their body, covering the whole surface. Hair color is going to be a variation in the pigmentation produced by the melanocytes. Now, melanocytes produce brown, black, yellow, brown, so anything from yellow to black is produced by the melanocytes when they produce the pigment melanin. Red hair will have the melanin. It also contains an iron pigment to give it that red coloration. And white hair, as you age, is going to be due to a lack of pigmentation and the form air bubbles within the medulla. So it gives a variety of different types of white shades, from a gray to pure white, yellowish white, is all due to the variations of pigment versus air bubble formation. Your hair growth cycle occurs as to how long your hair grows. It grows a certain amount, and it has a different growth cycle depending on where on the body it is found. Your hair will grow 2 to 5 years, usually, about 0.33 millimeters per day, or about 1 inch every 2.5 months. As it grows, the root that is firmly attached to the matrix of that follicle down at the very bottom will slowly be pushed away. Okay? At the end of the growth cycle, the follicle has become inactive. It's been pulled off the matrix, and it is now called a club hair. And what will happen then is that the club hair will detach from the hair matrix and a new hair will start to form. And as it's growing under the old unattached club hair, it will slowly push it towards the surface, and then the hair will fall out. And you will lose the hair. And you lose about 50 hairs a day. Seems like a lot more if you have long hair. It isn't really. It's just that they're much larger hair than if you have very short hair. And again, where the hair is found, it has a certain maximum length that it grows to. The hair on your head will grow longer than, say, the hair of your eyelashes. Your exocrine glands are going to be found in the skin. Now, the exocrine glands are the ones that produce the fluid and then release it to the body surface through some kind of tubing or ductwork. We have two general types of glands. We're going to look at sebaceous and we're going to look at sudoriferous. With your sebaceous, we have glands and we have sebaceous follicles. They both produce oil, and they will discharge that oily secretion to the body surface or to the hair follicles, depending on which one they are. Your sebaceous glands are associated with the hair follicles, so they will secrete it directly into the hair follicle. And they're going to release the oil, so gland or follicle is going to release the oil through holocrine secretion, where the whole cell will fill up with the oil and then it will rupture. The secretion it produces is called sebum. This is made up of triglycerides, cholesterol, some protein, and some electrolytes. And it's going to function to help inhibit bacterial growth, as well as lubricate and protect the hair and the skin. The second sebaceous is the sebaceous follicles. These are large sebaceous glands that aren't associated with the hair follicles. Okay. These will discharge the sebum directly to the epidermis, and these are going to be found on your face, your back, your chest, your nipples, external genitalia. These are not always active, whereas your sebaceous glands are on throughout your life. The sebaceous follicles are very active during the last few months of fetal development, where they secrete and shed the epidermal cells. They form a protective layer called the vernix caseosa. So some babies are born where they look kind of like white and greasy, and this takes a few weeks for this to slowly peel off. They stop at birth, their activity, and then they start again at puberty, and this is due to the sex hormones. And this is what causes pimples, or the sebaceous follicles are pimples. And acne is the inflammation of a sebaceous follicle, often due to some kind of bacterial infection. This is a cross-section of a hair follicle with a sebaceous gland. The hair follicle would be where the white circle is, but that's been removed. And surrounding that is the sebaceous glands. They look like the puffy clouds here. And they are going to have those cells of the sebaceous gland fill with the lipids and release that sebum directly into the hair follicle to give the hair follicle lubrication and ultimately the skin some protection. The other group of exocrine glands we're going to look at are your sweat glands. Your sweat glands are actually called sudoriferous glands. And there are two types of sudoriferous glands. There's the apocrine sweat glands, and these secrete their product into the hair follicles. These are going to be very active under the armpits, the nipples, and the groin. And this is going to be done by merocrine secretion. That is exocytosis of the product only. They package the product up into little vesicles and then they spit it out. Your apocrine sweat glands are only active after puberty, and the sweat will have proteins and lipids in it, and these will serve as a nutrient source for bacteria. When you sweat a lot under your armpit, you produce a lot of the nutrients, then the bacteria start to grow and multiply, and the bacteria are what produce the odor that is associated with body odor. These are surrounding these glands are myoepithelial cells, and these contract to squeeze the gland to release the sweat. The second type of sweat glands are eccrine sweat glands. These are much more numerous and more widely distributed around the body than the apocrine sweat glands. You have about 2 to 5 million glands. They are smaller than the apocrine sweat glands, and they discharge directly to the skin surface. They are extremely numerous on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. And these are the sweat glands that are going to be responsible for sensible perspiration, which you use for thermal regulation. Your sweat is going to be about 99% water, some salts, organic nutrients, antimicrobial fluid, and waste. And the pH will vary between 4 to 6.8. The function of the eccrine sweat glands is 1, thermal regulation, so it's going to reduce your body temperature if you're too hot, so you can maintain it in that little homeostasis. It is also going to excrete water and electrolytes, so we use it to get rid of waste products. And it will provide protection of the skin from environmental hazards. It will flush chemicals from the skin. It also has antimicrobial properties, so it will knock down bacterial growth on the skin, and the pH of 4 to 6.8 also helps with keeping down bacterial growth. Now there are other integumentary glands. I'm just going to mention a few here. You have mammary glands, which are anatomically related to the apocrine sweat glands, and these are involved with milk production. And you have ceruminous glands, which are modified sweat glands in the ear canal. And these will produce cerumen, which is earwax, and that is there for protection. That also has antimicrobial properties. Now we control our secretions or our glands in different ways. Your sebaceous glands and the apocrine sweat glands are going to be turned on and off as a group by your autonomic nervous system. That means they are turned on without any input from you. You have no control on those. There is no regional control. So if they're on, they're on. If they're off, they're pretty much off. The eccrine sweat glands you can more precisely control, and they can have local variation. So maybe your armpits are sweaty, but your palms are not sweaty right at that moment for whatever reason. The next accessory organ to talk about are your nails. These are on your fingers and your toes. And they're there for protection and to limit the distortion when your fingers and toes are subjected to mechanical stress. The structure of the nail is as follows. First, you have the nail plate, also referred to as the nail body in this figure. This is what you say is your nail, the visible portion of your nail. This will sit on epidermis, and the tissue that it sits upon is called the nail bed. It has proximal and lateral folds that will bind the nail at those surfaces. The eponychium is what you call your cuticle, and this is the portion of the stratum corneum, the top layer of the epidermis, And this goes over the nail root and will cover the edge of the nail, of the exposed nail. And then we have the free edge. That's the part that's growing that you cut when you cut your nails, and will continue past the nail bed. And underneath the free edge, there's a little bit of tissue, another thickened area of stratum corneum, and this is called the hyponychium. Remember, epi means above and hypo means below. At the base of the nail, you have the lunula, which is that pale crescent-looking structure, looks like half a moon. And this is due to the fact that as the nail is coming up and coming out of the skin, it is putting pressure on the blood vessels, and it is obscuring them or distorting them, so it kind of squeezes them. As the nail moves out a little farther and there's less pressure, then the blood vessels are freely flowing the blood, and it gives the nail a pink color. Now we have a side view of the nail where you can see where it's been cut, and you can see the nail body or plate extending above the nail bed, which is underneath the nail. And you can see it goes all the way back and see the nail root, which is embedded within the tissue, and the eponychium, the cuticle on top of the nail, which is thickened stratified squamous. Okay? And you can see the hyponychium, which is below the free edge of the nail. Now, the nail itself, the nail plate, is made up of dead, tightly compressed cells that are packed with keratin. So these are all keratinocytes that are now, once they come out from the root, they're alive, and there's matrix, just like with the hair, at the very beginning of the root, which gives rise to all the cells, the keratinocytes. And then as they slowly fill with keratin and now they're exposed to the outside, they are dead, keratinized cells. We're going to talk about what happens when you have an injury and a repair to the integument. Okay? There are 4 steps. The first is always going to be the inflammatory phase, which we talked about when we talked about tissues. In this case, a quick reminder, your mast cells are going to trigger the inflammatory response, and you, at this time also, you will have bleeding at the injury site. Now, when looking at the picture above, we not only have damage to the epidermis, it goes down into the dermis itself. So we're going to have a lot of bleeding from those blood vessels in the dermis. The second phase is the migration phase. In this phase, you're going to have the blood clot will form and a scab will form. This will take several hours, and this will be made up of the protein fibrin, which then traps the platelets and the red blood cells in between their fibers, and this makes sort of like a mesh covering over the opening, the hole, so it stops you from bleeding anymore, and this will harden and become the scab. At the same time, while the scab is being formed and it's now in place, we now have cells that are going to start migrating down from the epidermis down into the hole. Even though it's dermis, it's going to go all the way around and make a lining. Okay? These are cells from the stratum basal. They're going to migrate along the edge of the wound and hopefully eventually seal off the whole wound. Even though it's still deep, it will at least have a little capping on it. Your macrophages, which are types of white blood cells, are going to go in and start phagocytosis of dead cells, debris, and foreign invaders to clean up the area. We're going to have some increase in blood flow to bring in more white blood cells and nutrients. And if it's a very deep wound, we have to repair the dermal tissue before we can actually repair the epithelial tissue. So we're going to start with our fibroblasts and our mesenchymal cells. Recall your mesenchymal cells are your stem cells for connective tissue cells. They're going to start to divide and move into the deeper wound. The fibroblasts are going to be cells that produce fibers. That's going to make the collagen fibers that are going to help fill in the hole. And the capillaries are going to follow right along behind the fibroblasts, so that they can make sure there's a good supply of blood, and which will mean that there's a good amount of oxygen and nutrients. Granulation tissue is a combination of the blood clot, the fibroblast, the extensive capillary network. The next phase is the proliferation phase. Now we're talking about this taking time, okay? So over time the clot will start to dissolve and the number of capillaries will slowly break down. After about a week, the scab will have been undermined by epidermal cells that are migrating over these fibers. So what's going to happen is it's going to fill from the bottom up. So as the fibers are built up, it starts pushing that epithelial layer closer and closer to the surface, and it is going to then eventually knock the scab off. Okay? We're going to have a lot of phagocytic activity in the beginning, but during the proliferation phase, we'll still pretty much be done. We've pretty much cleaned up the hole. Now we've got to finish repairing it. And the repair is going to result in an abnormal dermal layer. The dermis is not what it's supposed to look like. It's going to have an abnormally large number of collagen fibers and very few blood vessels at this point. If it's really severe damage, the hair follicles may be damaged, the sebaceous glands or sweat glands will be damaged, and these things are rarely repaired. They are just replaced by fibrous tissue. This results in your scarring phase. Over several weeks, we continue to replace that tissue with dense fibrous tissue, and it is going to form scar tissue. This scar tissue may fade with time. It takes a while because there's a lot of remodeling involved, and it may take months before you have completely removed any of the scarring. Of big concern to the epidermis and dermis, the integument in general, is burns. Burns are severe. They can be very bad for your skin. They will damage the integrity of a large area of the skin. That means they're going to compromise its ability to protect you, its ability for excretion and maintenance of body temperature. It won't be able to have detection or store nutrients or synthesize vitamin D3 if there's a large area that's damaged. Okay. With a burn, you worry about infection, but the first and most important thing that they will worry about with the large burn will be dehydration, because you've lost your water resistance now, so the fluid is just going to evaporate right out of there. There are different types of burns. We have partial thickness burns, and these are going to include first and second degree burns. Your first degree burn will affect just the surface of the epidermis. This is what sunburn does. It will cause a redness of the skin, which is called erythema, which is inflammation of the sun-damaged skin. Second degree burns will affect the entire epidermis and maybe a little bit of the dermis, and will result in blistering, pain, and swelling. A full thickness burn is a third degree burn, and this is going to destroy the epidermis and the dermis and extend into the subcutaneous layer. Now, when it's destroying the dermis, it is also going to affect all the accessory organs, the blood vessels, the sensory nerves. It's less painful than the first and second degree burn because the nerves have been damaged. This will often require a skin graft to cover up the wound. Okay, so you get skin, you would get skin from another part of your body. They would take a thin slice and put it on there. Now we can grow skin in a petri dish in the lab, and they can put that right over it, so it now forms a nice seal while it is healing from underneath, and you have less chance of infection and less loss of water.